The night was pitch black, blanketing the sky, interrupted only by flashes of lightning that tore through the darkness, leaving behind resounding thunder. The rain poured down like an unending stream of tears, covering every road and alley in the city. Each drop drummed on the tin roofs, walls, and asphalt streets, creating a mournful symphony of nature. Amidst the torrent of rain and howling wind, the labored breathing of a woman rose faintly, overwhelmed by the surrounding noise, yet unmistakably present. She sat hunched in a wind-sheltered corner, the only spot offering refuge from the relentless rain. The weak glow of a street lamp cast light on her face, pale with pain. Her long, dark hair was plastered to her forehead and cheeks, while her eyes remained shut tight, bracing against the fierce contractions gripping her body. The wind outside roared as if in unison with her quick, ragged breaths, urgent and desperate. She knew that the moment had arrived, one she both dreaded and longed for. No one paused on that muddy, forsaken road, where loneliness and cold reigned supreme. Passersby, if there were any, hurried past under hats and cloaks, oblivious to the anguished cries of the young mother, a sound barely a whisper against the powerful backdrop of nature. Finally, a weak, feeble cry pierced the storm. The child had been born. That fragile cry was a declaration, defying the dark and the unrelenting rain. The mother, her face wet with rain and tears, gazed at the newborn with eyes that mingled exhaustion, pain, and an immeasurable depth of love. She held the baby in her trembling arms, feeling the soft warmth of the child's skin pressed against her own, so warm that it seemed to melt her heart even amidst the freezing night. There was no time for reflection, for tears, or for hesitation. The biting wind reminded her that it was late and the rain was growing heavier. She glanced around, her eyes searching for the faintest glimmer of hope. She knew that this was the hardest decision of her life, but also the only one she could make. She bent down and placed a gentle, trembling kiss on the baby's forehead, filled with boundless love and sorrow. Her lips whispered words that were drowned by the rain, an unspoken farewell understood only by mother and child. Tears mixed with the rain, streaming down her gaunt face. Her hands, weary and shaking, carefully laid the baby in an old, tattered blanket. She adjusted the covering, doing her best to shield the baby from the biting cold. "Please, someone, find you," she whispered, her voice as light as a breeze, just enough for herself to hear. She knew that as she turned away, the child would no longer feel her arms embrace, would no longer hear the slow, steady beat of her heart that had been its only comfort until this moment. Turning, she took slow, heavy steps, as if carrying the weight of a mountain on her back. Each step took her farther from her own flesh and blood, leaving behind a part of her heart that would forever remain broken. The mother walked away, her slender figure disappearing into the white veil of rain. No one knew that on that stormy night, a heart-wrenching decision had been made. No one knew that beneath an old, worn blanket, a tiny life lay crying, its voice lost in the symphony of the raging sky. And so that night, a story of sacrifice, love, and the unpredictable hand of fate began in the heart of an indifferent city. The cold rain blanketed the city, each drop hitting the ground with a resonant patter. In that dark night, Buddy, a small stray dog with shaggy brown fur, wandered the streets looking for scraps to stave off his hunger. The rain lashed against his face, but Buddy persevered, rummaging through the deserted streets. Suddenly, Buddy's ears perked up. Amidst the pounding rain and the wind whistling past tall buildings, a faint, fragile sound reached him, the cry of a baby. Buddy's heart thudded, his dark eyes lighting up with worry. Without hesitation, he followed the sound, splashing through puddles and slippery streets, heading toward a shadowy corner at the base of an old building. There, Buddy saw the baby curled up in a thin, soaked blanket, its small face pale, eyes shut, and cries fading into the rain. Buddy approached cautiously, eyes wide with curiosity and concern. The baby lay there, its skin turning blue and its cries growing weaker. As if close to exhaustion, Buddy gently sniffed the small face, sensing the faint, uneven breaths. A strange feeling surged through him, an instinctive drive that told him he had to do something to save this child. Buddy turned around and barked into the night, hoping his voice would draw someone's attention. But the wind and rain drowned out his calls, and no one came. Undeterred, Buddy barked several more times, pacing anxiously around the baby. The night, however, remained indifferent to his pleas. Realizing that barking wouldn't be enough, Buddy sprinted out from the corner, running as fast as he could in the direction of the police station he remembered passing many times before. His tired legs seemed to find new strength as he ran through slick streets, cold rain splashing up beneath his paws. Buddy had visited this station before, where some people would sometimes feed him or give him a pat. He hoped tonight would be different, that the kind-hearted people there would hear his call for help. At last, the police station appeared in Buddy's view, its lights casting a dim glow into the night. Buddy barked frantically, the sound sharp and desperate amidst the rain. Inside, Claire, a young police officer on duty, looked up at the unusual sound of persistent barking. This was not a typical bark, it was urgent, almost as if signaling something important. She stood up, quickly threw on her coat, and stepped outside. Claire saw Buddy, the stray dog she had seen a few times before, standing there, shivering but with eyes full of urgency. "What's going on?" "Buddy," she muttered. But Buddy didn't wait. He gently tugged at her coat sleeve, pulling her in a direction, barking loudly as if to make his point. Claire, surprised but sensing the unusualness of it all, followed Buddy, stepping through cold puddles as they moved through the rain-drenched streets. Buddy led Claire through narrow alleys and dark corners. Despite the driving rain, neither stopped. Finally, they reached the corner where the baby still lay, silent and as fragile as a flower battered by wind and rain. Claire immediately grasped the situation, her heart tightening at the sight before her. She knelt down and picked up the baby, holding it tightly to her chest for warmth, tears welling up in her eyes. Buddy stood by her side, panting but keeping his eyes fixed on the baby, as if making sure it was safe. "Thank you, Buddy," Claire whispered, her voice breaking. The dog responded with a weak wag of his tail, his eyes filled with exhaustion yet brimming with hope. Under the cold, driving rain, the three of them had found a miraculous bond, the start of a story filled with love and compassion on a dark, frigid night. Claire held the baby tightly in her arms, feeling the fragility of the tiny being. The child's body was cold, lips tinged blue and trembling in the rain, each breath seeming faint and weak. Without wasting a moment, she glanced around and saw Buddy, the stray dog, watching her every move with worried eyes. Claire knew that quick action was needed to save the baby's life. "Good job, Buddy," she said, her voice trembling but firm. She swiftly took off her outer coat and wrapped it around the baby to provide some warmth. The rain continued to pour relentlessly, showing no signs of letting up. Claire lifted the baby higher and hurried toward her patrol car, parked not far away. Buddy's eyes never left her, and he followed her step by step. as if understanding the urgency of the moment. Once in the car, Claire turned the heater on full blast and placed the baby on the back seat, checking its breathing. Droplets of rain dripped from her hair, splashing across her face and soaking her uniform. She felt the tension seeping through her muscles, but she couldn't afford to panic. Claire switched on the siren and drove off toward the nearest hospital, her eyes darting to the rearview mirror to keep a watchful eye on the child. The sound of the siren pierced the dark night, cutting through the sheets of rain. Buddy, unwilling to be left behind, ran alongside the car for a short distance until Claire disappeared from his sight. The dog stood there, soaked and shivering, his dark eyes deep and pensive as he watched the car fade into the distance. At the hospital, Claire rushed inside, the baby still cradled in her arms. She shouted for help, her voice echoing in the brightly lit but quiet hallway. Nurses and doctors came running from various stations. One nurse quickly took the baby from Claire and placed it on a stretcher, checking vital signs with practiced efficiency. "Take this baby to the emergency room now," a doctor commanded. And the baby was swiftly wheeled away, disappearing behind closed doors. Claire stood there, exhaling sharply, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. She leaned against the wall, rainwater dripping from her clothes and pooling around her feet. The seconds ticked by heavily, and images of Buddy, the silent hero of that night, flashed in Claire's mind. She could hardly believe that it was a stray dog that led her to the fragile child. Thinking of that, gratitude swelled in her chest. She promised herself that she would return to find Buddy and ensure he received the care he deserved. A nurse emerged from the emergency room, her eyes reflecting a glimmer of hope. "We've stabilized the baby. The child is weak but will survive, thanks to timely intervention," she said, her voice gentle yet significant. Claire nodded, feeling as if a massive weight had just been lifted from her shoulders. She glanced around and whispered a silent thanks to Buddy and everything the dog had done. With one last look toward the night rain, she knew there was one more task left: finding the brave dog who had saved a life without regard for his own safety. Within just a few days, the story of Claire, the baby, and the stray dog Buddy spread quickly across the city. A colleague of Claire's who had witnessed the events at the hospital shared the story on social media, and within hours, the post received thousands of shares and comments. The words depicting the loyal dog who ran tirelessly through the storm in search of help touched the hearts of millions. Photos of Claire with the baby at the hospital and images of Buddy standing alone in the freezing rain were widely shared. People were captivated by the brave dog, and many animal welfare organizations began searching for information to find Buddy and provide him with care. Across the city, an urgent search was underway, with hopes that the dog would be found and given the love he deserved. One morning, Claire woke up to her phone buzzing with continuous notifications. People called the police station, sent messages inquiring about Buddy, and offered food, shelter, and medical care for the dog. Claire felt a surge of hope. She recalled the moment when Buddy's eyes shone with determination under the cold rain, an unspoken resolve stronger than anything she had ever seen. After a night of relentless searching with colleagues and volunteers, Claire finally received important news. A resident from a neighborhood near the police station reported seeing a dog resembling Buddy taking shelter under the awning of a small store. Claire immediately drove to the location, her heart pounding with an indescribable joy. When she arrived, she saw Buddy curled up, his fur still damp and matted with dirt. But his eyes brightened as he recognized her. "Buddy!" Claire called, her voice quivering with emotion. Buddy lifted his head, eyes lighting up with joy at seeing the familiar friend who had saved the baby with him. The dog stood up, tail wagging slightly, and took slow, determined steps toward Claire. She knelt down, stroking his wet fur, tears streaming down her face. "You did well, Buddy. You're a hero." News of Buddy being found spread quickly, and the image of Claire hugging Buddy became a symbol of compassion and kindness. A wealthy family living in the suburbs was especially moved by the story. They had longed for a child and seized this opportunity to adopt both the baby and Buddy with all the love in their hearts. Claire witnessed a touching moment when the new family arrived at the hospital. Their eyes filled with love as they gazed at the baby lying in the cradle. The little girl was still frail but had begun moving her tiny hands. Buddy sat nearby, his eyes full of hope, as if understanding that the baby now had a family to care for her. The miraculous connection between a young mother forced to part with her child, a loyal stray dog, and strangers driven by kindness created a story that touched the entire city. As time passed, the stormy night gradually faded into memory. But the story of the stray dog Buddy and the rescued baby continued to live in the hearts of the townspeople. Buddy and the child had been welcomed into a new home, a cozy house in the suburbs with a sprawling garden full of flowers and lush green grass. The baby's new family was John and Margaret, a kind couple who had spent their lives longing for a child. Now, they not only had their little angel but also a loyal and brave companion, Buddy. The little girl was named Hope, symbolizing the journey she had endured and how she came into their lives. The early days were filled with joy and surprise for everyone. Buddy, who had once endured days of hunger and cold, now had a place to return to, hands to pet him warmly, and hearty meals every day. He quickly became a steadfast friend, always staying close to Hope's cradle, eyes full of protection and affection. John and Margaret were often moved to see Buddy sitting beside Hope, gazing at her with tender eyes and wagging his tail lightly when she burst into laughter. Those moments brought the couple a happiness they had long dreamed of. They poured love and care into both Hope and Buddy, creating a home where affection was never in short supply. As Hope grew, her first steps on the green lawn were always shadowed by Buddy's watchful eyes. The dog followed her every move, eyes sparkling with joy and loyalty. Margaret and John often sat on the porch, watching Hope and Buddy play among the flowers, sunlight casting a warm glow over them, creating a scene that looked like a fairy tale. Their new life was full of warm memories. When Hope began to speak, her first word wasn't mom or dad, but Buddy, bringing smiles to everyone. Buddy seemed to understand his importance in the family and grew even more devoted to Hope. At night, he lay by her bed, guarding her sleep, his eyes remaining watchful until dawn broke. The townspeople who had followed the miraculous story often recounted to their children and grandchildren how a brave stray dog had saved a child during a cold, stormy night. To them, Buddy became a symbol of loyalty and selfless sacrifice. Claire, the young police officer who had been there on that fateful night, frequently visited Hope and Buddy's family. Each visit filled her with joy and pride as she witnessed how life could change for the better because of a small but kind act. The story ended in perpetual happiness. Hope grew up surrounded by her parents' love and Buddy's unwavering friendship. To everyone, John and Margaret's family was proof that miracles could happen when there was kindness and love. Buddy, once a homeless stray, had found a place where he knew there would be no more cold nights or hunger, only warmth and love forever. They lived happily together, showing that sometimes the smallest miracles could bring the greatest joy and hope. And like a real-life fairy tale, love lifted them all above past sorrows and hardships.